as a security community, if we want to walk the talk that we are talking to make the world safer and more secure, we need to share, to be encouraged and to have incentive also to share within the community, and then we can reach our final destination, which is to have a safer and digitally safe and secure world.
Okay, and Mark?
Well, I agree with that. Yeah, the more we share, the more we understand. And I think if we share in a structured way, as Joe said, we can do it efficiently, we can make it actionable, we can make sense of the noise that's actually out there, not only for us, but for law enforcement, for joint industry groups, that kind of thing as well. So, yeah, all good stuff.
Okay. So a little bit on the controversial side. Some would argue that the service level agreement or the use of insurance or the use of covering yourself is part of a blame culture. So is the move to classify security as resilience a way of ending or amplifying this blame culture? Because some people would say that security implies a given level of assurance that you won't be breached, whereas resilience indicates that you can bounce back. So are we moving away from security and towards resilience, and what does that say about our blame culture? If you think we have one, Mark, what do you think?
It's quite a difficult one for me to actually answer, but I think companies are being pulled in two different directions. I think they're being pulled in the direction of the big tech companies who've got their own infrastructures and their own sort of SLAs, but also there's the drive from legislation and governments and making sure that you're doing the right thing. So I think in terms of that kind of hybrid of security versus resilience, yeah, we're somewhere in between that, but I think it's probably people on that can answer this a little bit better than me.
Okay, Alexander, what do you think? Are people just mincing words? What's going on?
So I don't know. What I can say is I can give an example. When I was a student, we studied for 2 years theory of safety, theory of security, history of safety, history of risk management, and all that jazz. And in the end, we were introduced to this book called Resilience by Andrew Zolli, and we were very disappointed that everything what we've learned about safety, security, and theory and all that stuff is not relevant because eventually you will need to bounce back and to be able to get back to business. So in cybersecurity, I don't think that having proper cybersecurity without, for example, incident management plan, that's not a security. So what I want to say is that there is security and resilience. It's not security or resilience or versus. So it's security and resilience.
Very good, Joost. I mean, there's a lot of vendor categories out there that provide security and a lot that provide disaster recovery and backup and resilience. But have people started to try and play with the terminology?
I guess so. The good thing of being in the intel industry is that there's no thing as an SLA in intelligence. I mean, there's no one that can actually go back to you didn't give me this piece of intelligence. I mean, if it's not available, if it's not out there, it's impossible to share it with anyone. Anyway, for resilience means indeed being able to bounce back. That to me is really on like playbooks. Things that guys like Verodin and TrapX are doing, deception, and making sure that proactively you can understand why, in terms of TTPs, techniques, tactics, and procedures, an attacker would do the things that he do. So you need to understand why, and not just what they're using, but why they're doing the things that they're doing, and how they might be able to do it in the future. Which is not around SLAs, basically it's around understanding more than anything else. So if you're resilient, if you are trying to be resilient, then you have to make sure that you're company understands or your customer understands why he's being attacked. And to me, that is really not a discussion around SLAs or it's not even about disaster recovery. It's really just understanding what's going on around me. What's the ecosystem that I reside in?
Okay. Well, Steve, then is there a blame culture at all?
There's always a blame culture because we're human beings, and human beings are always looking to try and mitigate the decisions they made in the past, be them, especially if they're poor. That's a natural human tendency. There are two. Well, I'm just trying to go through this as a panel we're talking. There are two different things, right? It's like saying, is IT and security the same thing, and does it bleed? Well, of course it does. So security permeates everything we do, and that's the point. And back to your point earlier, we can't blame ourselves for that because we keep telling everybody that, which is true, and therefore they go, oh, well, that must be part of resilience. Well, yes, it also is part of IT, is all part of everything else as well. So we need to be really, really careful that they don't try and describe one as the other. I think that's the important distinction, as opposed to say you don't need, of course you need both, right? Resilience for me is making sure that things continue, and security is making sure that things don't get broken, right? And never the twain should hopefully meet.
Very good. There's some marketeers out there in the world who must make that distinction, I think, as well. Michael, what do you think?
Again, I'd agree with everyone on the panel. I would almost insist that a good business practice is to demand both. You have to secure yourself against as many relevant possibilities as your budget allows, your design allows, or you protect the things that matter to you. But you also need a plan in place for when that security doesn't go right. We can have doors on our house and locks on the windows and security cameras, and yet still somebody, if they really intend to break into your home, will break into your home. So you've had your security, but you still must, for good business practice, have your resiliency plan as well. And as a consequence, whether you mix those words or not, they are separate business functions. They both provide different business value, but they both must be accounted for.
Okay. Well, then let's think of a good news story about it. You've got lots of MSPs out there who have wondered how on earth they're going to secure their functions. How have MSPs taken advantage of cybersecurity?
So in our space, we're seeing a lot of again, as a vendor, we have many MSPs who are customers of ours or who create services to their own customers based on our equipment. And broadly speaking, what we're seeing in our part of the industry is the trend to start to embed the security more into when I say the service that they offer, sometimes that service can be a box, sometimes it can be a solution that they're offering like a professional service, sometimes it can be something that's done over the wire like a cloud provider could do. But what we're seeing is the slow and steady, you can call it upskilling or you can call it making it a mandatory requirement, but the ongoing march of security being embedded in the consciousness. What we try to do is to accelerate that because we feel it's relevant and important.
Okay. Well then, Steve, do you have a good news story? How have managed service providers, taken cybersecurity on board?
With difficulty, I think, some of them. A lot of them in the past have been used to providing a specific set of functions for a customer. Customer then comes along and says, right, so we need to talk about security now. And you put it in and they say, okay, well, when what we do, we can do this, that, and the other. And they say, okay, well, I want you to broaden that reach. I want you to broaden what you do with us. And that happens quite a lot because they're going, look, I want one throat to choke, I want one place to go, I want one person to deal with. So I want you to bleed into everything else. That creates massive challenges for a lot of managed service providers who don't traditionally play in that space. So they've got to partner a ton more, and they do struggle with that. And I've also, on a practical level, I see quite a lot of them struggle with, on a pure commercial way, they used to sell a service, save their money, and move on to the next and keep going. And now what they're finding is they're having to provide annuity-based services or managed-based services where they're struggling to create that environment within their organization. So we've seen two large ones in the UK go bust recently because they tried to move from the instant cash environment through to the annuity-based model, and they really struggle with that. So it is challenging for them.
Joost, have you got a good news story for us? How have they incorporated security?
I'm not sure if this is a good news story, but what we did see and pick up in the last like 2 years, I guess, is that again I'll stick to what I know from what we do in the intelligence business. Is 2 years ago when we went to an MSSP, they would say, I can't pay you for throwing a bunch of IOCs to my managed SOC environment because my customer actually thinks that I'm doing that already. As where they were focusing basically on the telemetry from the inside of the network, not correlating that with information that comes from the outside. So not creating context, what we've talked about earlier. We now see that the customers, not so much the MSSPs, but the customers from the MSSPs actually understand that it's really important to make the managed SOC environment more efficient, making sure that there's less false positives. So now the story around not so much the IOCs, but mainly the DTP. So what the bad guys are doing, but also how they're doing it, it gets more, it resonates better basically. I don't think we're there yet, but it does pick up.
Okay, Alexander, I mean, I know that you're trying to meet with these MSPs to show them all of the things they could do better, but do you have a good story as to how they've incorporated?
I don't.
It,
Can I skip that one?
You can, but I mean, maybe that's telling. Maybe that's telling because, we need to spread the word, but we need to reassure them that it's a viable business model.
Yeah. Sure. So the more context I think the more contextual information they have, the more services they will be able to sell. So I don't see it as a blocker, but as an enabler. That's what I can say.
Okay. And Mark, what do you think?
Well, our story is pretty similar to Joost actually, that making this stuff meaningful for the MSP, for them to make it meaningful for their customers is absolutely critical. So it's making sure that the MSP is mindful of what the customer actually needs and what they need to deliver to them.
Okay. Then combining this and concluding, we're thinking about new people we have to speak with, be that CIO, CDO, CMO, CFO, and we're thinking about MSP of the future. Mark, who do you see as the owner of cybersecurity in the future and why? And let's please try and not say everybody.
I was going to say everybody. I think everybody does have a responsibility, but I think it is actually the end user that has the ultimate responsibility. Through training, through legislation or pressure from legislation, those kind of drivers, I think they need to raise their IQ. So ultimately, it's the end user that's going to have the ultimate ownership of the security.
Okay, well, that's good. I was looking for a job title, and that's a whole new dimension. Alex, who is the owner of the future of cybersecurity?
I think the Chief Information Security Officer, but also the other C-level people, like the CEO, the CFO, so everyone.
Okay. Joost, any new emerging people?
Well, it would be really cool if it would be the threat analyst. I mean, that would be a really dark and deep. No, it wouldn't be really cool if these guys would be the owner. I think that like the business owner, we were talking years ago. We were talking about shadow IT and business owners doing their own thing basically because they didn't like what the CISO or what the IT guys were doing. At the end of the day, they need to take responsibility over cybersecurity. I've heard immersive labs. I've heard Node before. All the training that we do, all the making sure that people understand why cybersecurity is important. At the end of the day, it's the business owner, the business unit manager, or whomever it is, that needs to make sure that the cybersecurity stuff that he's doing within his company and with his people basically makes sense to everyone, and therefore he should be the owner. Responsible, if we're talking basic, it's at the end of the day the CISO, of course, that it's his job to make sure that this can happen. But he's way more a facilitator, a third risk manager, contract manager nowadays than he is an actual, IT specialist.
Okay. And Steve, who's the owner of the future?
So who's responsible and who's accountable? So I need to get this right because I got it wrong in my head about a minute ago. Everybody's accountable, right? Or everybody's responsible. Everybody's responsible for it, right? But the CISO and therefore equivalent, which in my view will move up to be, a CTO in the end, because it will become so an integral part of the IT function that it'll bleed into the one and the other. But and that's the difference in accountable. So if, for example, right, somebody's sitting in their desk in accounts, they open up a phishing email and they get hacked. So are they responsible or are they accountable? Okay, they're responsible to be educated. The business is responsible to educate them to not do that. But if they do that, they're not going to be fired for doing that, because they're not going to say, well, you're accountable. You should have, this is part of your job function. It's not part of my job function. I work in accounts. And when it gets down to that, that's the point. So some person, body, or a group of people have to be accountable for this at some level. Like every other function in the business, it may well change, become the IT function later, but yeah, very much so.
Yeah, you probably don't want to sue accounts for gross negligence.
No, I wouldn't do that.
No. Michael, who is the owner of the future?
So rather than saying everybody, if I said no one single person, then it'll lend you some insight into show me a part of the business where security is not relevant. Show me a person or a suite of people where their function in the business has no impact on the business. They have no influence on, their actions have no influence on the business. Maybe that's the group that is the only group you can identify that isn't responsible or accountable. But to some degree, the world that we live in today is the one where everyone has a role to play. So, like everyone has said on the panel, everyone is responsible, and a small number of people should be held accountable. But again, you can't concentrate that into one person, one organization. In much the same way that you can't concentrate all of your, say, private and personal security can't entirely be 100% on your shoulders. Sometimes you delegate that out to somebody else. When you get into a car, when you're on a plane, you're delegating to the world around you. So actually everybody is the only answer.
Wow. Oh, we have one comment in the room.
Okay, I've got a slightly different spin on this.